Well, Majid Dahiru joins us now. He's a newspaper columnist, and we're going to be talking about what sort of officers are needed to man the post. While we have the Electoral Act, the debate on that one is still on, not debate now, but the fate of that one is yet to be finally decided, either by the president or by the members of the National Assembly. There needs to be a conversation around the operators of the Electoral Act. The people who will be operating it are mostly in INEC. Yes, there's a role for everybody, but they are the ones, the drivers of the Electoral Act. And we understand that about 5 positions recently became vacant, or about to become vacant in INEC, in the position of national commissioners, and even some RECs, some state resident electoral commissioners as well. And there's now conversation around the sorts of people that need to fill the spaces, especially in the light of what we've seen before, where clearly non-partisan members were fielded by the party, by the APC, or let's say the president, as the case is. And to join us to discuss this issue as to whether or not he has any apprehensions, I think I already introduced him, is Majid Dahiru. I do not know. First, a Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, my sister.
The year has started with a big bang.
Honestly.
And the politicians are already...
All suspense suspended.
They've gotten right into it and they're jumping into the waters of politics.
They can't wait.
And dragging all of us along with them.
Yes, well, it's interesting. It's going to be a very exciting year.
Very exciting year. Well, we hope that while we pay attention to our democracy, I also hope that we also pay attention to the everyday things that affect people, electricity, water, etc. But this is where we are right now. I do not know if you've given thought to this issue of those who will operate the Electoral Act, which, well, we're still trying to decide what will become of that. In the next couple of weeks, we should know what will be the fate of that. But are you apprehensive in terms of those who will be operating this Electoral Act?
I am. I'm one of those who believe that the operators of the law are actually even more important than the law. And so I'm very apprehensive because we've practiced democracy since 1999, and so by this year we'll be 22 years old as a democracy. And people are beginning to lose faith in democracy in Nigeria and most of sub-Saharan African countries. And the reason is because democracy has not yielded the much anticipated dividends in terms of improved security and welfare for citizens. And so people are beginning to question the very relevance of democracy. But I believe that democracy still remains the best form of government, and that the problem of Nigeria is not democracy, but Nigeria is actually the problem of democracy. And so to correct the problem we're having of democracy in Nigeria is to apply more democracy. I believe we've not practiced democracy in the true sense of the definition of democracy in Nigeria since 1999. We've made improvements somewhat, sometimes we've seen reversals of some of those improvements as well. And so if democracy is to yield fruit, it has to come with a credible electoral process. You see, a credible election is the soul of a democracy, without which a democracy is dead, is infertile, it is sterile, and cannot yield any form of dividend in terms of improved welfare and security. And so it is important that if democracy must continue to remain relevant in our lives as a people, everything must be done to improve the electoral process that truly, truly empowers the Nigerian people to elect or reject their political leadership at all levels and all tiers of government in line with their performance. Election cycle should be a reward or punishment for good governance or otherwise. When Nigerians are fully empowered by a credible electoral process to do this, good governance will now become an incentive for political office holders. If you want to return, if you want to remain relevant to the system, a credible election will now incentivize good governance. But as we speak, if we go into the next cycle of election, particularly in a country that is challenged in terms of security, in terms of economy, and even out of control corruption, if we go into the next round of election without one, a sanitized legal framework for the next electoral cycle that will be operated by people of high, if not the highest level of integrity, people that are non-partisan, people that are experienced, people that are committed, that have a lifelong passion and commitment to good governance and credible electoral process. My fear is that if we repeat what I've described several as electoral banditry that has characterized our democratic experience so far, you are likely going to have administrative bandits in all tiers, arms of government. And my dear sister, when you have administrative bandits in power, their failure of leadership will not only sustain the bandits on our highways and our forests, but it will create more. And Nigeria might just, as predicted by many and as feared by many, might just become a case of a failed state. So the last attempt to salvage Nigeria and pull Nigeria from the brinks of state failure and maybe eventually state collapse is a credible electoral process going into the next round of election. This election is one like none other before it, because of the circumstance we find ourselves. We must be able to elect the best of us, put our best foot forward into all offices, irrespective of political party affiliation, ethnicity, religion, or region of origin.
You know,
but to do this, we require not just that legal framework, but those that will operate, the legal framework to bring about the reality of the intent behind the electoral reform laws that we're all clamoring for.
Well, recruiting the best of us, will involve many things. It's going to involve talking about our recruitment process in the very first instance, whether or not the people who we consider the best of us will be coming forward in the very first place, or whether it's just for us to still have the electoral framework and perhaps even the best people with high integrity, having to deal with one of the male people, so to speak. There'll be questions there. But let me go back to the Electoral Act and also the operators of the Electoral Act. As we speak, I do not know that there is any criteria strictly spelled out, that these must be the criteria that people who will be called upon to fill the positions of those who operate our Electoral Act or who act as umpires must fulfill before they are elected. Do we have any such thing that spells it out?
Apart from the constitutional requirement that makes people eligible, you see, there's a difference between eligibility and qualification. Eligibility, or rather qualification, is simply what the Constitution says. Maybe the right age, the right level of educational qualifications, being in Nigeria, some of these superficial requirements. But eligibility, you now have to factor in the institution you're talking about in question. For example, it would be wrong to appoint an engineer as the chief medical director of Federal Medical Center in Abuja, any of the other health management institutions. Because, yes, he's qualified to be appointed, but because they're going to a health management institution, you need somebody that is eligible, somebody who has the special skill and all other extra constitutional qualifications that might not be clearly spelled out. You see, in the case of INEC, beyond just the mere qualifications, eligibility in this context will mean people that are non-partisan because of the nature of INEC. Non-partisan. People that have no affiliation with any political party. People that are simply out for good governance. And this must be very, very considered in making any of such appointments.
How do we begin to, non-partisan, it might be clear, because some people will say, okay, maybe it's not clear, because is it that you must never have been a member of a political party, or that you could have been a member of a political party, you're no longer a member of a political party? There'll be questions as to what partisan will really mean. In terms of all the other things, some people will say there's no way to test that if you're about good governance, for instance. How do you know that? Unless you're going to be digging into the person's history, and that will be if the person has served in any public administrative capacity, that we can say this is this person we trust.
In addition to digging into that history, something came to the rescue of Nigeria when we had this conundrum or this dilemma of how to actually determine who is truly non-partisan. Between 2003 and 2007, the past administration of President Olusegun Obasanjo appointed people that were known to have partisan affiliations into various offices in INEC. And the result was that the 2007 election has gone down in history as perhaps one of the worst elections in the history of Nigeria, so much so that even the beneficiary denounced the process that brought him to power. And so the conversation started about reforms, electoral reforms. First, it was suggested that the judiciary should take over the responsibilities of conducting elections. INEC should be seconded to the judiciary. It's still in the pursuit of that non-partisan nature of those that will operate the system. But a middle ground was actually reached between all of the contending ideas on how to achieve this important solution to what was ailing what ailed our electoral process. And so the issue of CSOs came up. We had credible CSOs and credible people that have been at the forefront of championing good governance, the cause of good governance through non-NGOs and CSOs. And some of these individuals participated in the struggle against the military. And when the military eventually handed over to civilians in 1999, they continued the struggle now towards achieving good governance, even with elected civilian democratic political leadership. They have been at the vanguard of good governance. And they do not pander to any political party. Their lifelong passion and ambition has been good governance through CSO engagements. And so it was decided to experiment with certain individuals from the CSO world. And that was how Jega, Professor Atahiru Jega, iconic Professor Atahiru Jega, was brought in from the academia, he had been a labor leader in the academia, and everybody knows him to be a passionate advocate for good governance at all spheres of his own influence. And he came along with certain individuals too from that background into the INEC management system. And we saw a marked improvement between 2011 now and 2015 in our electoral process. The first thing they did was to actually sanitize the register. You recall that before, we used to have Michael Jackson, we used to have Mike Tyson and co. in Nigeria's electoral register across the board. So even the register was not credible. So they marked on a credible voter register that would actually enhance the credibility of the elections. And a lot of other reforms were carried out because they had no interest in any political party. They were immune from particular party influence.
So isn't it taken for granted, and I don't want to take away from what they've done and the progress that has been made, but if we're to look at a trajectory from the appointment of Professor Jega up till now, I mean, with the appointment of Professor Mahmood as well, isn't it taken for granted as to the sort of persons we're now seeking in those sort of offices?
And that is where our apprehension is coming in. We've moved gradually from appointing politicians into INEC as either recs or federal commissioners, national commissioners. Now, there's a contestation now between, the CSO world and partisan politicians. So we are beginning to have this fear that perhaps we are about to revert to the pre-2011 era when positions in INEC, important positions like resident electoral commissioners and national commissioners, are filled with people with either near or remote partisan interest. And that will derail our electoral process and create a crisis that we may not be able to contain as a nation. Because when people lose faith in both the electoral process, the laws governing it, and those that are actually running the system, they might resort to self-help. Nigeria is already challenged. You have a situation where we're having shared sovereignty with non-state actors that are heavily armed. People are beginning to turn away from the state. The state is gradually losing legitimacy. And we're saying the only thing that can reverse this trend, is for people to key in and have faith and confidence in the electoral process enough to be able to participate freely and accept an outcome that they believe is reflective of the popular will of the people. But when you now begin to populate INEC as feared by people that have remote or near or perceived partisan interest or affiliated to political parties has been speculated across board, we may not have that confidence in the electoral process enough not to challenge the outcome or even to participate. So if you want people to participate and accept the outcome of an election and work closely as citizens going forward to rebuild what was left of our Nigerian country, it is important to begin the process now of not only putting in place the adequate legal frameworks to actually sanitize the electoral process, but we need, most importantly, those that will operate the laws. In fact, if you have credible people manning INEC, people of integrity, and in this instance, people that have the experience, because this election is very crucial. And it's less than a year to the election, or about a year to the election. You can't afford to have people learning on the job. And so we need people that have both experience, people that have what it takes, that are already set in their ways as people that have performed so well within the system to man the election going forward, because this election is going to be very decisive in our history as a country.
Let's take this conversation to Lagos now. I'm sure my colleagues have questions for you. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Makwe. One of the questions that comes to my mind as you were speaking earlier about this whole thing, electoral management process, is the role that people can play. Yes, there are people at the top who are supposed to get one or two things done, especially talking about this INEC national commissioners. But in this electoral management process, not just the voting, not the politicking, what role can the people play? I'm wondering if we have not delayed too long the point of this INEC national commissioners until now. Is there a role that the people generally can play in the run-up to this point where?
You see, ordinarily, we shouldn't be having a conversation about how to appoint people into INEC. I mean, it should have been a given that anybody who should serve in an important body such as INEC should be somebody of unimpeachable integrity without partisan affiliation, because INEC is supposed to be independent and immune from political interference. That is the very nature of INEC in our democracy. But beyond advocacy, such as we are doing now, those in government, those in authority, the National Assembly, those in the executive, are actually part of the Nigerian people. It's a collective destiny we have with those in power. And the appeal will be for those in power to please overlook or look beyond their current privileges as incumbents and look at the larger picture. It is in their own interests. It is in our own interest and our collective interest, as a matter of fact, that the right things be done. We are all going to be beneficiaries, directly or indirectly, of a credible electoral process. And so, for
when
example,
you say, my apologies, Mr. Dahiru, just a second. When you say it's our collective responsibility that the right thing be done, the question is, what is the right thing here? Because that is subjective. One of the questions a number of people have asked is, if we're going to have INEC commissioners, and we want people who have proven integrity, where better to have proven them than within INEC itself? One of the people that has been recommended now has served in the electoral management body for many, many years. Is there anything wrong really in having maybe a law or a system or a policy that promotes people up the ranks so that the institution is stronger for that purpose over the years?
Thank you very much. It is important to first not appoint partisan people into INEC. Now, beyond not appointing partisan people into INEC, yes, for the purpose of retaining and sustaining institutional memory, there are very credible individuals in INEC that have distinguished themselves over the years as people that are immune from political interference and have discharged their duties as an unbiased umpire in every responsibility that they have undertaken as electoral managers. And they abound within the system. And that's what some of us are saying. In addition to not appointing partisan people, we may not be able to afford bringing people that will begin to learn on the job, particularly when a crucial election such as election 2023 is approaching fast. And so it will be advisable to look inwards into the system, even as a way of strengthening that institution, to identify individuals that can be elevated to the next level of their responsibility to continue to carry out the good work they've been doing within INEC. You will agree with me that INEC has conducted very credible elections in the recent past. Very credible elections, despite the shortcomings, despite our reservations. We've seen credible elections being conducted across board. And the individuals responsible for this should be elevated to fill some of the vacancies first. And we are even going to go outside of INEC to get extra hands. we will also strongly recommend people of CSO backgrounds to come in. For example, it's a bit curious that somebody like Professor Ikechukwu Ibiano, the national commissioner that actually supervises elections in Anambra, is not being offered the opportunity of a renewed term to continue the good work he's been doing. He was one of those who actually championed the reform that Jega carried out in INEC that improved substantially our electoral management system to such a point that by 2015, an incumbent lost an election to an opposition. And that was a signpost that our democracy has matured beyond just being a crawling democracy. He was a technical advisor to Professor Jega. He has discharged responsibility in Anambra, for example. And he will agree with me that the way the Anambra election was conducted went a long way to douse tension in that state, because the outcome was generally acceptable to the people. Now, you also have Professor M.J. Kunan in the system. He's still the technical advisor to the incumbent chairman, as was the case with Professor Jega. One would have expected that somebody like that, who was part of this build-up, this reform, this all-important reform over the years, should have been offered the opportunity to also serve as a national commissioner or a resident electoral commissioner, as the case might have demanded.
But some people say we don't want to take the prerogative away from the president. It's still his prerogative, isn't it?
No, it's our duty as citizens to have this conversation and set an agenda for our leaders, because whereas it is his prerogative, this is an interest for all of us. It's a thing of concern for all of us. You have a lot of them. Are you talking about AVM Ahmed Mazu, the national commissioner who supervised elections in Taraba, in Adamawa, and some other states in the northeast? And he came out, with a very transparent process that was acceptable to all. It is the same thing with Mike Higini, for example. I'm particularly worried about Mike Higini because he's a person of very special interest to me. I say this because we have followed him throughout his days in the civil society space. And when he was appointed into INEC, some of us felt, hope this will not, change his character, the integrity we know him for. Hope this will not actually transform him into an establishment person. But he has defied all odds to improve at every sphere of responsibility he was given our electoral process. The recent being the prosecution of a high-profile electoral offender in Akwa Ibom, who is now serving a 3-year jail term. So it tells you that there are people like this within the system that should be given opportunity for the sake of our electoral redemption and our democratic rebirth.
Well, we certainly will keep tabs on the matter, as we also keep tabs on the fate of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. We have to thank you so much this morning for coming on Sunrise Daily. Majid Dahiru is a columnist for the dailies and has been speaking to us here in our Abuja studios. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much for having me.